And that is the exact opposite of what you want to do. We're the armed attorneys. Our mission is to make life easier for the law-abiding gun owner by providing fast and factual gun law explanations. Today, we're talking about the top 3 mistakes we see gun owners make following a defensive incident. Stick around to the end for our pro tip on making the 911 call after your incident. And before we get started, show your support for the Second Amendment by hitting that like button.
And that brings us to the first mistake we see folks make following a defensive incident, and that's manipulating the physical evidence, right after they had to defend themselves. And what does this look like? Sometimes it's the urban legend online of, oh, I shot someone outside and I drug them inside, or, you just don't know how you're going to react. It could be unloading your gun or starting to clean up the area. And the important thing is to hit the brakes. You don't want to do that, because when your, story about how you had to defend yourself doesn't line up with the physical evidence, the ballistics, for example, then it is a real red flag to police officers, prosecutors, and even juries. So don't make that mistake. Kind of freeze, reassess, and before you start, muddying things up.
Yeah. Plus, you could find yourself charged with an additional felony for taking those steps. I mean, most states have a tampering with evidence law. Most of the time we think about tampering with evidence, someone eating their drugs, but in a defensive scene, you can still tamper with evidence even though you don't realize that that's what you're doing.
And that brings us to mistake number 2. Emily, you want to walk us through mistake number 2?
Yeah. Mistake number 2 is not calling 911 immediately after the incident. And that is the exact opposite of what you want to do. Even though, your adrenaline's pumping, you probably feel like you want to take a moment or two to collect yourself before you get on that really critical 911 call. Unfortunately, every second, every minute that ticks by is going to be held against you. We have people who, wait 10 minutes to call. That's too long. 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour. It looks really bad. It looks like either you were toying with whether or not you were actually going to report it. It looks like maybe you were trying to get your story straight or your statement right. I know your adrenaline's going to be pumping. I know it's tough. You've got to be ready to make that call immediately.
And that brings us to mistake number 3, which is not consulting with an attorney following a defensive incident. What we see a lot of times in our practice, this happens frequently when, police come out to the scene, they see, this is a clear-cut self-defense case, and they really don't pay as much attention to the evidence or statements or take pictures like they probably should. And if somebody's died, then that's pretty clear that they'll take the extra investigatory steps, but not always. And especially if someone doesn't die, then sometimes they just think, the scene is, this makes perfect sense right now, and we're going to move on to kind of the next best thing. We're not going to investigate this any further. And it's really important to have an attorney come in on the front end to, help preserve evidence, help preserve statements, videos. They're going to know what to do in that situation in order to, establish and keep your self-defense case in case these things come up later down the line. And we've seen that happen.
Oh, they do. Yeah. We have talked to countless people who call us a year or more after the incident. They just got indicted. And they weren't expecting it because probably on the scene, the cops were like, hey, man, this looks like self-defense. Maybe it's even written in the report. But you can't stop when that one district attorney who hates guns or doesn't like self-defense gets their hands on that case. They want it indicted. It's going to be indicted.
Yeah. DAs change, detectives sitting in their cozy chairs, 6 months from now, they start second guessing everything. You just never know what's going to happen. And that kind of brings us to our pro tip of the day, which is how to handle a 911 call, or at least the most important, what I think is the most important part of a 911 call, which is hanging up the phone after you get out that critical information. So after you call 911, you've given them your name, location, the services needed, usually police and EMS, and, maybe a short, truthful, defensive statement about, the incident. Hey, somebody just kicked down my door and I had to defend myself. The next most important thing is to hang up the phone. We see this mistake made all the time.
Yeah. And, not only you don't know what's going to come out of your mouth. I can't count how many clients I've had say something like, he had it coming. And guess what? Most of the time he did. It still doesn't sound good. But you don't know what you're going to say. Also, you've just shot someone. You don't know what they're going to say. And we've had it happen where the victim is dying on the ground, and it's tough because you can hear that on the 911 call. You've got to hang up. Richard, do you want to talk about what you did to someone?
Yeah. So when I was a prosecutor, I had a defendant who, what I called 10 minutes of psycho breathing after the 911 call. They followed all those 4 steps that we just talked about, but then they didn't hang up the phone and proceeded to breathe like a crazy person into the receiver of the telephone. And that's how I characterized him at the time. And in all fairness, he was a psychopath. But, you just never know how that is going to be used against you. And that's why it's so important to hang up the phone after you get all that critical information out. Well, I hope you found this video useful. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, consider subscribing, hitting that like button, and help us fight the anti-2A algorithm by sharing this video.
And please continue to question and comment below. Until next time, we're the Armed Attorneys.